today, please join me in reciting the 3 refuges, followed by the Heart Sutra, page 7 and 8 in the ritual booklet. I go to refuge to Buddha, my deeply awakened mind, the living source of understanding and compassion, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I go for refuge to Dharma, the path of mindful living, leading to healing, joy, and enlightenment, the way of peace, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the loving and supportive community of practice, realizing harmony, awareness, and liberation, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I am aware that the 3 jewels are within my heart. I vow to realize them. I vow to understand living beings and their suffering. I vow to cultivate loving kindness and compassion, and to practice joy and equanimity. I vow to live simply and sanely, content with a few possessions, and to keep my body healthy. I vow to let go of all worry and anxiety in order to be light and free. I am aware that I owe so much to my parents, teachers, friends, and all beings. I vow to be worthy of their trust, to practice wholeheartedly, so that understanding and compassion will flower, and I can help living beings be free from their suffering. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. And now the Heart Sutra. The Maha Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. The Bodhisattva of great compassion from the deep practice of Prajna Paramita perceived the emptiness of all 5 skandhas and delivered all beings from their suffering. O Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is emptiness, emptiness form. The same is true of feeling, thought, impulse, and consciousness. O Shariputra, all dharmas are empty. They are not born nor annihilated. They are not defiled nor immaculate. They do not increase nor decrease. So in emptiness, no form, no feeling, no thought, no impulse, no consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no form, sound, smell, taste, touch, or objects of mind, no realm of sight, no realm of consciousness, no ignorance, nor extinction of ignorance, no old age and death, nor extinction of them, no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cease from suffering, no path to lead out of suffering, no knowledge, no attainment, no realization, for there is nothing to attain. The Bodhisattva holds on to nothing but prajna paramita. Therefore the mind is clear of any delusive hindrance. Without hindrance there is no fear. Away from all perverted views, one reaches final nirvana. All Buddhas of past, present, and future, through faith in prajna paramita, attain to the highest perfect enlightenment. Know then the prajna paramita is the great Dharani, the radiant peerless mantram, the utmost supreme mantram, which is capable of allaying all pain. This is true beyond all doubt. Proclaim now the highest wisdom, the prajna paramita. Gate, gate, para gate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, para gate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, para gate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. The Maha Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. So good morning once again, everyone. I'm so happy that you joined us today. My name is Aisu, and I'm honored to serve on the Dharma Council and offer this talk today. Today's Dharma talk is called Women in Buddhism, and it was inspired by this book called The First Free Women, Poems of the Early Buddhist Nuns by Maddie Weingast. And as I was researching and preparing to give this talk, I ventured off in a multitude of different directions for how this talk could go. There's so much to explore and learn about this topic, women in Buddhism. But what inspired me most about this book was the concept of freedom for women within the Buddhist tradition, both at the inception of the Buddhist tradition at the time of the Buddha and now. So if we think about the origins of our own country, we know that it was built on patriarchy, it was built on slavery, and it was built on brutality. There were no women who signed our founding documents. Slavery had been a normal part of life in America for more than 150 years before our independence. And the first Europeans who arrived on the shores of the East Coast began the centuries-long decimation of the native peoples who had long honored their land. The first sentence of the Declaration of Independence reads like this, and some of you probably know this by heart. We hold these truths to be self-evident. that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Again, we see here that the Declaration of Independence, the foundation of our democracy, is not written for women, for those who believed in non-theistic ways of being, and certainly not for slaves who were considered property and not people. So why am I going into all of this in a talk about women in Buddhism? Because the social issues that we are still experiencing today in this country, almost 250 years after our founding, go right back to the foundations, the structures that were built to hold up this country in its infancy, a system that is built specifically for white, straight, wealthy Christian men. There's no combination of identities that holds more privilege in our country. And because of the structures built into the DNA of our country, those of us whose identities differ have less freedoms and less opportunities than those who do. One can say the same thing about Buddhism. While the spirituality of what the Buddha taught was for everyone, and he said so on many occasions, the systems that were built to hold up the orders that emerged from the Buddha's time were flawed, and even the Buddha initially hesitated in allowing women to ordain. There's a story about Mahaprajapati Gautami, who was the Buddha's aunt and foster mother, who one day went to see the Buddha. She was grieving over the death of Buddha's father, and she requested the Buddha to allow women to renounce their homes and enter the life of a novice nun. Before this time, women had not been allowed ordination, one of the reasons being was that they were recognized as the pillar of the family, and it was feared if they were allowed to leave their homes, there would be no more support for the families, the men and the children. There were also questions about what impact allowing women to ordain would have on the dynamics of the Sangha, so the dynamics between men and women within the Sangha. And for this reason, the Buddha initially declined her request. Still, she made the same request 3 times, and 3 times the same answer was given. Eventually, Gautami and 500 other women started following the Buddha and listening to the teachings as renounced persons, wearing robes with shaved heads. Ananda, Buddha's personal attendant, saw the hardships the women endured following the Buddha and went to the Buddha again and asked why he didn't ordain them. Ananda had asked the Buddha about ordaining women many times prior to this, and finally the Buddha agreed. But while the Buddha's teachings were the same for both men and women, and the Buddha believed that all individuals had the capacity to become awakened, without exception, the rules and vows that were a part of ordination and a part of the order in the early years of Buddhism were very different between men and women, and some are still different between men and women today. For example, the Vinayas, or ordination precepts, are very telling. In Theravadan Buddhist traditions, there are 227 precepts for monks and 311 precepts for nuns, so 84 more precepts for nuns. In the Dharmagupta tradition of China, there are 250 precepts for monks and 348 precepts for nuns, so 98 more precepts for nuns. And in the Tibetan tradition, there are 253 precepts for monks and 364 precepts for nuns, so 111 more precepts for nuns over monks. And all 3 of these precepts discrepancies still stand today. So why so many more precepts for nuns? I found many interesting reasons for this, but the 3 that I researched and read about most are the following. First, the nuns automatically got all of the precepts that the monks had to commit to, which were based mostly on the monks' transgressions. That's the first reason. Second, the nuns got additional precepts based on the stereotypes and beliefs about the weaknesses of women in ancient Indian culture, based on fears of how the addition of women could cause imbalance in the Sangha. And the third reason that the nuns got extra precepts was to ensure that they were not doing anything to cause the monks to transgress their own precepts. So those are the primary three reasons why those precepts, there are still discrepancies between monks and nuns who ordain. And I'd like to share a few more contemporary examples. In 1928, the Supreme Patriarch of Thailand, responding to the attempted ordination of 2 women, issued an edict that monks must not ordain women. And the 2 women were reportedly arrested and jailed briefly. That was less than 100 years ago. In more recent challenges to the Thai Sangha's ban on women, Dhammananda Bhikkhuni was controversially ordained in Sri Lanka in 2003 upon the revival of the full ordination of women there. In the Tibetan tradition, a geshe is a monk who has gone through many years of education and debate about Tibetan Buddhist history and philosophy. It's relatively similar to what we might call like a PhD level education in Tibetan Buddhism. The geshe educational process has been ongoing in Tibetan culture for centuries, but only for monks. Tibetan nuns were first able to participate in this process in 2010, and the first geshema, which is the female version of the geshe, graduated in 2016, only 5 years ago. And one more example that will hit home for those of you who are fairly new to this temple. When this temple was founded about 10 years ago, our founding teacher, Duck One, realized that some changes had to be made once the temple started to grow, and there was interest from some within the Sangha to ordain. Although there were many reasons for the separation from our original order that Duck One brought to the temple as he founded it, we became an independent temple because within this specific order, women, individuals over 50 years old, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and disabled individuals are not allowed to ordain. So if this temple were still a part of our original order and hadn't gone independent, and we were following their rules as prescribed, every ordained teacher at this temple would not be allowed to be ordained on the basis of at least one of those 4 reasons. So we can definitely draw a through line from the ordination and community structures that were built for men, basically, almost 2,600 years ago, to the challenges that Buddhist women face today for equality. Now I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about women in ancient India who found freedom by entering the path of Buddhism. And the following is kind of a direct line leading into the book that we're going to explore today and the poetry written by these early Buddhist nuns. So to offer context, here's a little bit about what life was like in India for women during the Buddhist time. Women were generally looked upon as being inferior to men, and at times they were considered as being on the same level as the Sudras, or the lowest of the 4 castes. Their main role was considered to be that of housewives, managing the affairs in the house according to the wishes of their husbands. Even as a wife, the life of a woman was difficult, and this was especially so when a woman had the misfortune of being a co-wife. As I was doing research for this talk, I found a passage in the Middle Discourses that dealt with a man who was leaving his 40 co-wives to join the path, to join the Buddha. So conflicts between co-wives were a common feature in ancient Indian society. And the widow's plight was even worse. Normally, a widow was not allowed to remarry after her husband died. And in some areas of India, it was expected for a widow to kill herself by jumping into the funeral pyre of her husband. Women's freedom was extremely limited. Society dictated that they had to be under the care of parents in their childhood, under the protection of husbands in their youth, and in their old age, they had to be under the control of their sons. Women did not have educational freedom. Their religious freedom too was restricted, so opportunities to perform meritorious religious rites were very limited. And finally, the birth of a female child was considered as a sign of misfortune in the family. Parents prayed for the birth of sons, both to carry on the family name and traditions, and also to perform the necessary religious rites for the parents' benefit after they died. Now, this didn't go as far as some other cultures as it relates to female infanticide because of the ahimsa concept within Hinduism during this time, which is respect of all beings and rejection of violence. But even then, male children were still preferred. So the lives of women in ancient India were dictated by society, were extremely limited in opportunity with almost non-existent personal freedoms. Their lives were scripted from birth. But the Buddha's arrival on the scene changed things for women. The first Sangha was radical in that day because it was open to everyone from every caste, both men and women. The Buddha unhesitatingly accepted that women are capable of realizing the truth just as men are. So by ordaining women as nuns or bhikkhunis, the Buddha offered women the opportunity to escape the grind of daily life, to follow their own dreams, to change their own script. And life was so hard for most women that entering the Sangha was in itself a liberation. Here are a few unattributed words from a woman entering the Buddha's path. So freed, so thoroughly freed am I from my pestle, my shameless husband, and his sunshade making, my moldy old pot with its water snake smell. Aversion and passion I cut with a chop, and I come to the foot of a tree and meditate, absorbed in the bliss. What bliss? Our guided meditation this morning comes from the book I mentioned previously, The First Free Women, Poems of the Early Buddhist Nuns. And the poems you're about to hear originate from the Therigatha, which means verses of the elder nuns. Therigatha is one of the sacred texts of early Buddhism and is the world's oldest collection of women's literature. And this collection of poems is quite diverse, some dealing with realizations of certain teachings, some related to difficulties understanding and living into some of the teachings. If you can see from my book, I had many difficulties in picking which poems to choose because they're all so relevant. But the poetry that I chose for today's meditation all relates to the concept of freedom. These poems ask us to remember our greatest potential, our potential to be our authentic selves, our potential to live a life that's scripted solely by us, our potential to be free, and not just the potential to be free from the difficulties and the inequalities and the suffering of daily life, like women in ancient India did, but free. These women created more than beautiful poetry. Their acts of shaving their heads and donning robes was revolutionary for its time, a radical act. The Buddhist women of today certainly stand on the shoulders of these courageous, dedicated women. For today's meditation, we'll begin and end with 3 bells. In between, you'll hear stirring, inspiring poetry written by a woman whose husband left her with a huge debt, a street worker, a woman at the end of her rope, a slave, a mother of 10 sons, a trio of sisters, and a daughter who was almost sold by her father for her weight in gold, as well as several others. We'll have about a minute of silence in between each poem. And finally, before we begin our meditation, of course, we know that the bones of the women who wrote these poems have long ago turned to dust. But today, their words will be brought to life by our Dharma sisters, Ambo, Ellen, Fanchen, Haley, Ikyesu, and myself. Please prepare for meditation, and if you're not speaking during this meditation, please make sure that your audio is muted.
Free by Mutta. One morning after begging for my food, looking down at one more meal I hadn't worked for, hadn't paid for, hadn't earned, a life of debt I could never repay, pushing in on all sides like the weight of the sea. I blinked, and a tear fell into my bowl. Would it always feel like this? Just as the moon rises up from the bottom of the sea, a handful of rice lifted itself from the bottom of my bowl, and my heart rose with it. I wish I could tell you how it tasted, that first bite of food as a free woman.
The Wealth of Kasi by Adha Kasi. A night with me used to cost more than all the land in Kasi. But through all the pricing and the haggling, I somehow lost interest in being talked about like a field of wheat. Unlike any crop, I have ripened here in the shade of these gentle trees. A field for no farmer, a land that has paid for itself.
By Sama. After 25 years on the path, I'd experienced almost everything except peace. When I was young, my mother told me that I would find true happiness only in marriage. Remembering her words all those years later, something in me began to tremble. I gave myself to the trembling, and it showed me all the pain this little heart had ever known, and how countless lives of searching had brought me at last to the present moment, which I happily married. Can you imagine? We've been living together ever since, without a single argument.
Happiness by Soma. He said, "How could a woman who knows no more than how to cook, clean, and make babies possibly reach the further shore, on the way to which so many good men have drowned or turned back?" I said, "The mind is neither male or female. When directed toward the arising and passing away of all things, it easily penetrates this mass of darkness. Be serious. What's a few inches of meat compared to the immeasurable reaches of a liberated mind?"
Lioness by Siha. People used to say that I was so beautiful it hurt to look at me, like the sun. The sun lights the whole world, but it isn't free. It lives its life on a leash. I lost weight and grew pale. My sister said I looked like a dead person. When I finally put on robes, my family was almost relieved. Maybe it would help. For 7 years I wandered. I got really good at being sad. Late one afternoon, I took a rope and went to the woods. The sun was setting. I could feel the rough fibers against my neck as I put my head inside. That's when I saw it was just one more leash. What goes on can come off.
The 500. Yes, your daughter. By some road, she came into this world, not because you asked her. By some road, she left this world, not because you told her. In between her coming and going, she passed some time here with all of us. Oh, the places she's been. Next time, she might be a lion, or a god, or a slave, or someone's mother, yours. Then it would be your turn to die young, and her turn to chase after you. If you really want to cry for somebody, why not cry for yourself? Why not cry for all of us who are just passing through? Fall on your knees and weep. Get it out. Now get up. You've got work to do.
The, the Tree by Sona. I brought 10 sons into the world. I thought that would have been enough, but when my body could no longer conceive, I lost heart. Giving birth and raising children was all I knew. Then a nun told me how beings come into the world based on countless causes and conditions. I stayed with her and learned to raise a mind that didn't conceive. Yes, my sisters, the years do go by. Soon, all the little pieces that make up this body will go on to make up other bodies. See this for yourself. Then ask me why I shaved my head.
By Punika, the slave. In the early morning, well before dawn, I would go down to the river. It was my job to carry water up the hill to my master's house. Of course, we all want to be free. But what good is freedom when your sisters remain slaves? I used to imagine an old man down there by the river. I used to imagine what I would say to him. What does it mean to own another human being? What does it mean to feel your own skin, to touch it, and know you are not free? We all have bodies. My sisters, I don't have to tell you. But where did I get this body? What made me a slave? The old man and me standing here watching the river, waiting. But for what? Over the years, this round heart has been pounded flat.
The First Sister by Chala. What will be the last voice you hear right before you cut the chains of the world forever? Will it be someone who loved you and cared for you? And did you abandon them? Did you break their heart? It's not too late, they'll say. You can still come back home. In between the passing away of one voice and the arising of another is the path, freedom.
The Second Sister by Upakala. I left home soon after my sister. She found a cave, I a community. Typical middle sister, always the social one. The voice inside my head always used to ask, why do I have to be the middle sister? Never first, never last. When is it my turn to feel special? These are our stories. First, second, third. I thought the path would make me feel special, but instead it sang such deep, rich tones that the voice inside my head just couldn't help but sing along. If you're going to tell yourself a story, why not tell yourself a story of freedom?
The Third Sister by Sisu Pakala. First, one sister left, then the other, then it was my turn. While meditating one night, I entered a deep stillness. A figure emerged from the background. It could be anyone. Maybe someone you once loved, or maybe someone you still love. Whoever it is, they'll promise, they'll threaten, they'll say whatever will hurt the most. Here in the stillness, you'll break, or you won't. Many of you have already been practicing for some time. Sooner or later, you have to get in there and see what you're made of. This isn't about how green the grass is or how blue the sky. This is about freedom.
Beyond Compare by Anupama. Growing up, my sisters and I had gold coins for toys. When there's that much money around, being beautiful isn't such a big deal. Somehow we all were. All my suitors started off talking about beauty and ended up talking about money. One prince told my father, "Give me your daughter and I will give you 8 times her weight in gold." That night, my father kept passing me the mashed potatoes and ordered extra dessert for the entire table. For some reason, I was remembering those gold coins and how we sometimes put them into our mouths. The taste of gold is something you never forget. When my thoughts drifted back to the table, my father was staring at my half-eaten pudding. I could see in his eyes that he was doing the math. That night, I cut off my hair, climbed out the window, and walked away. I knew it would be a long journey. At least I was starting on a full stomach. That was many years ago. Looking now at these old hands, I can't help thinking that the prince's offer was a little silly. Any day now, the crows and dogs will get all this for nothing. Know your price, my sisters. Don't accept less.
And we bow. Thank you, Dharma sisters, for your beautiful readings today. To close our service, please turn to page 8 to recite the closing gathas. For all unskillful action ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thoughts, now I atone for them all. Vast is the robe of compassion, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Buddha's teachings for the benefit of all sentient beings. All beings, one body, I vow to liberate. Endless blind passion, I vow to uproot. Dharma gates, without number, I vow to penetrate. The great way of Buddha, I vow to attain.